She said it with the kind of voice people use when they're half laughing at their own pain, as if trying to bury it beneath irony. At this point in life, love just isn't for me. I hadn't meant to overhear. I was only waiting in line, holding a chipped mug from my favorite corner cafe, the kind of place where names weren't asked, but faces were remembered. Her words weren't meant for me, but they landed anyway. Clean, quiet, and final. I glanced her way just long enough to see a woman who wore experience like a coat she hadn't taken off in years. Not in the way of wrinkles or graying hair, but in posture, the kind that doesn't expect much anymore. She sat with another woman, younger, maybe, or just louder. They were mid-conversation, but that sentence stayed with me like it had been addressed directly to my chest. When the barista called my name, I took my coffee and turned, but something rooted me. I didn't approach her. I just watched her laugh politely, nod at a story that didn't seem to touch her, then glance out the window like she was searching for proof that time had moved on. 2 weeks passed before I saw her again. Same table, alone this time. No book, no phone, just a glass of water and a nearly empty cup. I sat nearby, not close enough to intrude, just enough to be within orbit. She noticed me eventually. Our eyes met in that way strangers do, acknowledging the space we share without stepping into it. I offered a quiet nod. She returned it with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It took 3 more Saturdays for her to speak to me. "You come here often?" Half amused, as if the line itself was some kind of inside joke. "Habit," I answered. "Good coffee. Predictable chairs." She raised an eyebrow. "Predictable chairs? They never wobble," I said. "Stability matters," she laughed. Genuinely this time. And for the first time, I saw what her smile looked like when it wasn't trying to hide anything. We didn't exchange names. We didn't need to. We just started talking, bit by bit, about coffee blends, about the way the world seemed to speed up while people slowed down. I didn't flirt. I didn't lean in. I didn't ask for her number or try to make her laugh. I just listened. When she paused, I let the silence breathe. When she spoke, I didn't try to fix anything. One morning, she looked particularly tired. Not messy, just quiet in a different way. Her hands wrapped around the cup like she was drawing warmth from it. Without thinking, I said, "You look like you didn't sleep." She didn't flinch. "I don't, usually." "Bad dreams?" I asked. "No," she said, eyes on the street outside. "Just quiet nights." "They echo." I didn't answer that. It wasn't until the 6th time we met there that I reminded her of the sentence she'd said weeks before. "You once said love wasn't for you." She blinked, caught off guard. I didn't think anyone heard that. "I did," I said. "And I've been wondering, who told you that lie?" She didn't answer, not with words. But her hand tightened slightly around the mug, and she didn't look away. She started arriving earlier. Not much, just enough that our timings aligned without effort. I never asked if it was on purpose. I never needed to. Some things are better left unsaid, especially in the early silence of familiarity. We sat at separate tables the first few times, but gradually, the space between us shrank. One morning, she motioned toward the empty chair across from her and said, "If you're going to stare at your coffee alone, you might as well do it here." So I did. She wasn't guarded, just cautious. Her words came out slow, like someone who'd grown used to measuring how much of herself she could offer without it being used against her. I recognized that, not from personal heartbreak, but from years of witnessing people carry things they never speak of. She told me her name then, Claire. I said mine. She nodded like she'd already guessed it. We didn't talk about the past. Instead, we talked about things that didn't demand too much. How bitter coffee needed the right kind of sugar. How Sunday mornings made the world feel paused. How people said they wanted honesty, but rarely knew what to do with it. She was clever without trying to impress. I liked that about her. There was no performance, no curated version of herself, just the raw edges of someone who had stopped pretending long ago. I never touched her, never reached across the table or brushed her arm. She didn't seem like the kind of person who needed grand gestures to know she was being seen. I gave her presence instead, full, undivided attention. It's strange how rare that is, how people hunger for it without knowing what they're missing. One day, as she stirred her coffee, she asked, "Why do you keep showing up?" "Because I said I would," I replied. She tilted her head, searching my face for some sign of agenda. "But you don't ask for anything." "I don't need to." Her eyes softened, but the question lingered between us like steam from the cup, warm, rising, slowly disappearing. We started walking after coffee. Not far, just around the block. She always wore the same coat, even when the weather didn't demand it. I think it made her feel protected, like armor woven into fabric. One morning, she stopped mid-step and said, "I don't do this." "Do what?" "This." She gestured vaguely between us. "Spend time with people without knowing where it's going." "Neither do I," said. She studied me, as if weighing how much of herself she could afford to risk. Then, almost reluctantly, she asked, "So where is this going?" I didn't lie. "I don't know, but it's going somewhere." That seemed to satisfy her, or at least confuse her in a way that didn't scare her off. We parted at the corner. No promises, no requests. Just a quiet, "See you tomorrow," from me. She didn't answer, but the next morning, she was there before I was. 2 cups on the table, and no plans. Claire didn't offer her past like a story. It came in fragments, scattered across quiet mornings and half-finished sentences. I never pressed. I let the pieces fall where they were, trusting I'd understand them when the time was right. It was a Wednesday when she told me about the house. Not a memory, more like a confession. "I still sleep on one side of the bed," she said. 12 years divorced, and I still can't bring myself to take up the whole space. She said it while breaking a muffin in half, like the act of saying it needed to be cushioned by something ordinary. "Old habits," I offered gently. "No," she said. "Old loyalties, to someone who stopped choosing me long before he left." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet acknowledgement of something she'd already made peace with, or tried to. I didn't offer sympathy. I just sat with her. People underestimate how much that mattered, being willing to sit inside someone else's silence. Her children were, one in another country, the other caught up in a life that didn't leave room for long phone calls. She said this without complaint, as if distance was simply the cost of having raised independent people. My mother always said I was too much of something, too opinionated, too practical, too tired-looking. She laughed softly. Now I think I'm just too invisible. "You're not," I said. She didn't argue. She didn't believe me either. But she heard it, and sometimes that's enough. Work had taken its toll on her. Years in finance, always proving, always correcting, always performing under the pressure of men who didn't bother to hide how replaceable they thought she was. She carried herself like someone who knew exactly how not to ask for help. "Retirement's a strange thing," she said once. "You think freedom will feel like flying, but mostly, it just feels like being untethered." I nodded. "You don't strike me as someone who drifts." "I don't," she said, "but sometimes I forget what I'm anchored to." That stayed with me, the way she said it. Not lost, but disoriented, like someone who knew the map by heart, but didn't trust the terrain anymore. We didn't talk every day. She needed space, I understood that, but whenever she showed up, I made, never filling the silence unless invited. One morning, she arrived late, hair slightly damp, breathing faster than usual. "I almost didn't come," she said, taking her seat. "Why did you?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I didn't want the day to feel longer than it already does." So we sat, drank coffee, watched people pass, and slowly, without declaration or demand, her days started to weigh a little less. She noticed it before she could name it. The absence of pressure. The missing undercurrent of urgency that had always accompanied the presence of men in her life. I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't fill her silences with clever words or lean too close under the guise of interest. I was simply there. And maybe that's what unsettled her the most at first. Being near someone who wasn't trying to take anything. "I'm not used to being around someone who doesn't want something from me," she said once. Not as an accusation, but as a puzzled truth. I shrugged. "Maybe I just want to be around you." She studied me like the concept was foreign, maybe even dangerous. But she didn't pull away. There was a night when she canceled our usual morning coffee. A short message, polite but distant. No explanation. I didn't respond. Not out of indifference, but out of respect. If she needed space, I wouldn't chase her through it. 3 days passed. I didn't reach out. I kept my rhythm, went to the cafe, walked the usual block, let time breathe without trying to control it. Then, on the 4th morning, she returned. She sat down like someone testing the temperature of a room. I didn't mention her absence. I didn't ask if she was okay. "Most people would have texted," she said, almost teasing. "Most people aren't you," I replied. She stirred her drink longer than necessary, then exhaled. "It wasn't personal. I just needed to see if not showing up would matter." "It mattered to me," I said, "but not enough to make it about me." That's when something shifted. I saw it, not in her expression, but in her posture. A quiet surrender to the idea that maybe not all presence came with conditions. Later that week, we walked further than usual. No destination, just movement. She told me about the day her ex-husband packed his bags while she was at work, how he left a note and not much else, how the silence in the house after that became louder than any argument they'd ever had. I didn't fall apart, she said. I just disappeared, piece by piece. And now? I asked. She glanced at me, thoughtful. I think I'm starting to come back. Slowly. We stopped at a bookstore she liked. She didn't invite me in. I didn't offer. Instead, I said, "Take your time." "I always do," she smiled. That night, she sent a message. Not long, just a line. "Thank you for not pushing." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because sometimes, silence is the only answer that doesn't ask for anything in return. The distance didn't arrive loudly. It crept in the way fatigue does. Quiet, almost reasonable. Claire stopped coming every morning. Then she skipped the walks. Messages became shorter, delayed, carefully neutral, not cold, just measured, like someone testing how little of themselves they could offer without being noticed. I noticed, but I didn't respond the way people expect. I didn't demand explanations or ask if I'd done something. I didn't fill the gap with reassurance or concern disguised as curiosity. I stayed where I was. Steady, available, unmoved. There's a difference between absence and retreat. Hers was a retreat, a strategic pullback, built from old reflexes. I recognized it because I'd seen it before, not in myself, but in others. People who learned early that closeness always came with a cost. One morning, after a week of silence, she showed up again, later than usual, different coat. Her eyes didn't meet mine right away. "You didn't check on me," she said, not accusing, but searching. "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know," I answered. She frowned slightly. "Most people assume silence means disinterest. Sometimes it just means thinking," I said. She sat down, exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath longer than she realized. "I thought if I stepped back, you'd either disappear or chase me. And if I did neither," she looked at me then, really looked, "then I wouldn't know what to do with that. I'm not here to test you," I said, "and I'm not leaving because you need space." That unsettled her more than any confession could. There was no drama to react against, no role to play, just a quiet consistency that didn't demand anything from her in return. She told me later that week why she'd pulled away. A call from her sister, a comment about age, about practicality, about not wasting time on things that couldn't possibly lead anywhere. Old fears dressed up as common sense. "I built a wall a long time ago," she said. "It was easier than explaining myself." "And now?" I asked. "Now there's a window," she replied. "I'm just not sure I know how to open it without letting everything in." "You don't have to," I said. "Just enough to breathe." She smiled then, small, honest, tired, but present. From that day on, she stopped disappearing, not because she felt trapped, but because she realized she didn't have to vanish to be safe. And I stayed, not on the other side of the wall, not trying to break it down. Just there, where she could see me when she chose to look. It was raining when she showed up that day. No umbrella, no message ahead of time. Just the soaked outline of someone who hadn't planned to come and changed her mind too late. She stood just inside the cafe door, looking around like the space itself might answer something for. I was already there, same table, same seat, reading a book I hadn't turned a page in for 10 minutes. She saw me. I nodded once, said nothing. She walked over slowly, her hair clinging to her temples, her coat giving off that tired scent of rain and asphalt. When she sat, she didn't remove the coat or say hello. "I almost didn't come," she said. "You look like you didn't mean to," I replied. She half laughed, then shook her head. "I didn't. I was halfway to the market when I turned around." "Why?" She looked down at her hands. "I didn't want the day to end without seeing someone who didn't expect anything from me." We didn't talk much after that. I ordered her tea without asking. She took it with both hands, like it was the only thing steady enough to hold. We sat there, listening to the rain push against the windows, like it had somewhere to be. After a while, she said, "Everything feels louder lately. The quiet, the clocks, the kitchen faucet, like the house is reminding me it's still empty." "You don't have to be strong today," I said. She didn't thank me. She didn't cry. She just nodded, eyes fixed on nothing, and drank her tea like it was medicine she didn't want but knew she needed. When the cafe closed early because of the storm, I asked if she wanted a walk. She hesitated, always hesitated, but then stood up, wordless. We shared one umbrella, walking close but not touching. The streets were mostly empty, and the world felt hushed under the weight of the... We ended up at a small park, benches slick with rain, leaves clinging to our shoes. She sat down anyway, pulled her coat tighter, looked straight ahead. "I used to think love had to be dramatic," she said. "That if it wasn't overwhelming, it wasn't real. And now I think I mistook pain for passion." We didn't speak after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the moment didn't ask for more. I sat beside her, letting the silence settle like a blanket. Neither of us had the energy to fold. When I walked her home, she paused at her door. "You didn't ask what happened today," she said. "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." She nodded. "Maybe next time." Then she opened the door, stepped inside, and left it slightly ajar behind her, for a second longer than necessary, just enough to let me know something small had shifted. A decision had been quiet, simple, important. There was no declaration, no shift in rhythm. She simply began to show up differently, less guarded, more present. The space between us didn't shrink, it softened, and in that softening, something grew, slowly, deliberately, without the need for permission or explanation. We didn't change our routine. Same cafe, same table, same quiet walks through a city that rarely slowed down. But there were new details now, small, almost invisible things. She started arriving with a book tucked under her arm, and sometimes she'd read a line aloud without context, as if inviting me into a corner of her mind she didn't usually share. Once, she left a note inside a novel I mentioned liking, just a line. "Stillness isn't absence." She didn't bring it up, and neither did I. There was something ceremonial about those mornings. The way she stirred her drink twice before tasting it, the way I stopped bringing my phone. We didn't plan it that way, it just became truth, a pattern woven from care. One day, she handed me a photo. It was faded, worn at the corners. Her younger self, seated on a windowsill, legs crossed, smiling in that unaware, untouched way people smile before life complicates things. "That's who I used to be," she said. "Who are you now?" She hesitated. "Someone learning how to belong without shrinking." I carried that sentence with me for days. There was an afternoon when we ended up in a museum. Neither of us said we were going. She was across the street when I saw her, and we simply fell into step. The art didn't matter. What mattered was the silence, the way we stood in front of the same painting for too long, the way she leaned slightly in my direction, as if trusting I would hold the space around her even if I never touched her. Later, outside, she said, "I've always been the one who carried others." "You still are," I replied, "but you don't have to do it alone." She looked at me like she was trying to unlearn every lesson that had told her otherwise. I didn't try to explain what we were. I didn't ask her to name it. Some things lose their meaning when you press too hard. What mattered was how she looked at me now, without flinching, without apology, like I wasn't a guest in her story, but a witness to it, chosen, trusted. That evening, as we parted, she reached into her bag and handed me a folded piece of paper. No note, just a pressed autumn leaf inside. I nodded, tucked it into my coat, and said nothing. She walked away slowly, but didn't look back. She didn't need to. It was late in the season when she finally let the question fall between us. Not in the way people ask because they're looking for answers, but the way someone asks when they're afraid the answer might confirm what they've always feared. "What if I'm just a temporary project to you?" We were sitting by the river, watching the water fold into itself like it couldn't decide where to rest. Her voice didn't carry bitterness, just weariness, the kind that settles in after too many goodbyes, too many almosts dressed up as promises. "You're not," I said. "That's not a real answer. It's the only one that doesn't try to convince you." She looked away, jaw tight. I waited. "I've been the woman men practice with," she said after a while. "The one they learn from before they move on to someone younger, simpler, less complicated." "You're not complicated," I replied. "You're clear. Most people just aren't ready for that." She didn't respond. I could feel her retreating, not physically, but somewhere deeper. That quiet step back behind her ribs, behind every version of herself she'd had to defend. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I don't need saving. I don't need fixing. I just want to know if you matter enough to be chosen." Her eyes met mine then, not wide with hope, not narrow with doubt, just steady, waiting. "I choose you," I said. "Not as a rescue, not as a charity, not even as a promise. I choose you because I see you, and I like who you are when no one's watching. A long silence followed. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. But she stayed, and that, for her, was everything. We walked back through the city in near darkness. She told me about her first heartbreak, the kind that doesn't break you all at once, but splinters across years. How she stayed in a marriage long after it had gone quiet. How she'd taught herself to be satisfied with the sound of her own voice echoing through empty rooms. Some women lead, some adapt. I adapted, she said. And now, every time something feels real, I wait for it to end. It won't end today, I said. She nodded, as if storing the sentence somewhere just in case. Trust isn't rebuilt through declarations. It grows in repetition, in presence, in the quiet proof that you're still there after the doubt has had its say. Before we parted, she touched my sleeve, not to pull me closer, just to anchor herself in the moment. I'm not sure how to do this, she whispered. You don't have to know, you just have to choose. And this time, she did. We left the city for a weekend. No plans, no itinerary, just the idea that somewhere quieter might allow room for breath. Claire suggested the town, a place she hadn't visited in years, tucked between hills and old streets, where nothing urgent ever seemed to happen. I drove. She watched the road in silence for most of the way, her fingers tracing invisible shapes on the way. The inn was small, wooden floors, thin walls, a bed that creaked when you sat too fast. She laughed the first time she heard it, then covered her mouth like the sound had surprised her. That night, we walked through narrow streets under a sky full of soft clouds. She talked more freely than you, memories surfacing without resistance. A childhood trip, a bakery that no longer existed, the smell of her mother's perfume. I used to come here with my father, she said, stopping outside a bookstore closed for the... He let me pick one book, no matter the price, said it was the only thing worth never saying no. We sat on a bench nearby. I didn't speak. I let her memory breathe. She leaned back, her eyes scanning the darkened windows like she was trying to find her younger self among the dust. You ever think about how many versions of yourself you've left behind? Sometimes, but I think the good ones come back when they're ready. Didn't answer, but her hand moved closer to mine on the bench, not touching, just near, like proximity itself was a form of trust. The next morning, we bought fresh bread and walked to the lake. No conversations, just the shared rhythm of footsteps and the slow comfort of repetition. She sat on the dock with her knees pulled in, her face turned toward the breeze. This feels like something, she said quietly. But I don't know what yet. You don't have to name it, I replied. She nodded. Still, I want to. We spent the afternoon exploring shops filled with things neither of us needed. She picked up a scarf, ran it through her fingers, then put it back. I bought it without her seeing and left it on her pillow. She didn't say anything when she found it, just draped it over her shoulders before dinner, like it had always belonged to her. Later, as we sat by the window of the room, watching dusk fall over the town, she whispered, I didn't think I could feel this again, not without fear. Do you still feel it? The fear? She paused. Yes, but it's quieter now, like it knows it's no longer in charge. Outside, the sky deepened, shifting from blue to something between violet and gray. She rested her head against my shoulder. We stayed like that until the light disappeared completely. She didn't say she was happy. She didn't have to. Some truths don't need to be spoken to be understood. It was a Tuesday when she invited me to her place. No ceremony, no hint of hesitation. Just a quiet message that said, dinner, if you're free. I didn't ask what changed. I just went. The apartment was modest, lived in. Books stacked in corners. Soft light spilling across framed photographs that hadn't been rearranged in years. The kind of space that had held grief and routine and long stretches of silence. But that night, something was different. The walls didn't feel like they were holding something back. They felt like they were finally letting something in. She cooked simply. Pasta, a salad, warm bread she said she didn't have time to make but somehow did. There were 2 plates, 2 glasses, a folded napkin beside mine. Small details, each one louder than any declaration. As we ate, we didn't fill the room with words. She asked how my week was. I told her about a book I'd started and wasn't sure I liked. She laughed once, softly, when I described the main character as ambitiously boring. It wasn't the kind of evening people write songs about. It was better than that. It was real. Afterward, she showed me her paintings. Not the ones she displayed in galleries years ago, but the ones she kept in a drawer. Unfinished, untitled, unshown. They were raw, intimate, made from colors that didn't match until you stepped back and let them breathe. I stopped painting seriously a long time ago, she said. Felt like everything I created just made the silence louder. But you kept them, I said. She nodded. Couldn't throw them out. Felt like erasing something that still needed to become. I asked if I could look at them, and she let me. No explanation, no guiding my response. Just offering them the way she had started offering herself, without apology. Later, we sat on her balcony. The night was cool. The city moved gently below us. She wore the scarf I'd given her, not because it matched anything, but because it didn't have to. I used to think love needed to announce itself, she said, loud and certain, like a knock on the door you couldn't ignore. And now? Now I think it's more like this. Quiet, undeniable, still figuring out the shape of itself. I didn't reach for her hand. She didn't lean into me. We just sat, shoulder to shoulder, watching the lights flicker in the windows across the street. Before I left, she walked me to the door. No lingering looks, no drawn-out goodbye. Just a gentle, almost imperceptible smile as she said, "You're welcome here." I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to. Some beginnings don't need grand entrances. They unfold slowly, like something returning after a long absence. And as I walked down her street, past parked cars and quiet storefronts, I knew this wasn't a conclusion. It was the quiet start of something that didn't need to be proven. Not the end. Not yet.